Many athletes work their whole lives for a chance to compete in the Olympics. Thousands of hours go into training for an event that can last a few minutes. Some, like Miachel Phelps, find glory, while many more fall short of their dreams. Few know this journey better than Dave Durante. During his career, Dave put in the hard work and saw success and heartbreak at the highest level. He gives an incredible, candid look into the process associated with pursuit of greatness on the world stage. Dave is a multiple-time USA Gymnastics national champion and was part of the 2008 Beijing Olympic Team as an alternate. He helped coach Stanford University to an NCAA Team Title in 2009, and he's also the co-founder of Powermonkey Fitness and the Powermonkey Camp. In this episode, we learn how Dave handled the lowest point of his career when he was not selected to compete in the 2008 Olympics. We explore the day-to-day of a Team USA athlete before and during the games, what Dave has learned about being an elite athlete from now being a coach, and how the future is looking for Olympic sports like gymnastics. Unfortunately, as a spoiler, it isn't very promising. Dave, welcome to the Exponential Athlete Podcast.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me on. This is awesome.
So I'm so excited to have you here. You have such a unique journey in gymnastics as an Olympic team member, as well as creating an incredible business and being an incredible coach outside of the Olympic realm. I wanted to have you in because you have this really unique Olympic experience that I wanted to cover with you. And you, I think, might have one of the best perspectives into what it's like to be a high-level athlete that is chasing their dreams, but also has some things that don't exactly go your way. And you were able to recover in such a unique way. So I'd love to start. I obviously recorded a teaser with a lot of information about this before, but I'd love to start with where your love of gymnastics came from.
So first, thank you for that. I appreciate the intro. I grew up in New Jersey, kid loving sports, played a ton of different sports growing up. My father was from Italy. Soccer was a big part of our family. I had an older brother, played soccer. It was just part of our family. So sports was just a big part of everything that we did on a regular basis. So I played a ton of sports, and gymnastics was one of them. So I wrestled for a long time. I played baseball, basketball, soccer, obviously. And gymnastics was just something that you'll hear this a lot from a lot of different Olympic gymnasts or just gymnasts in general saying, I was jumping on the furniture in my house and, my mom didn't want me to break her couch or something. And they put me in gymnastics. And that's what happened to me. Like I was standing on my head on my couch. Mom was like, fortunately, we had an amazing gymnastics gym. One of the best programs in the entire country was just a few blocks away from my house. So there is this kind of access component that made gymnastics possible for me. If I was in the middle of another state, middle of rural America, where a gymnastics gym might have been a couple hours away, who knows whether or not gymnastics would have been as impactful as it became. But it really was in walking distance from my house in New Jersey. And it was one of the best boys programs, Surgeons Elite Gymnastics, which is still there. There's 3 gyms in North Jersey. And I fell in love with the sport. I walked in. I remember these very odd dates in my life. October 12th, 1986 was the first day I walked into the gym. And I remember the smell. I remember the smell of the chalk in the air and the sweat of the athletes and seeing like a little haze because there was so much chalk in the air, and walking in the gym with my mom and being like, this is where I want to be. And I was not a very talented or good gymnast, especially initially, but I just loved being in there and learning things that other kids were not able to do. That was really interesting to me. That, you could pick up a baseball bat and you could swing 10 times, maybe hit 1 time, 2 times, 3 times you go to Hall of Fame kind of a thing. But gymnastics, you could spend years and still just be on the absolute basic level unless you really dove deeply into it. And to me, there was like an artistry to the sport that I always kind of resonated with my personality and my creative background. So gymnastics to me was definitely something that stood out opposed to the other sports where it was fun. I love the team camaraderie that came with it, but gymnastics was definitely something special.
So something I noticed that you didn't say in there was, wow, the first time I walked in the gym, I thought about a gold medal. I thought about the highs that I could achieve. I thought about all in gymnastics, maybe probably not as much the money and stuff like that. Quite. But to me, that's something that I really wanted to hold time for, because that's not how a lot of kids view sports now. Mm-hmm. I mean, when I was a kid, I loved playing baseball, but it's because I wanted to be a professional baseball player. And guess what? I burned out on baseball eventually. I also wanted to note the parallel between yours and Michael's story, who I've done so much extensive study on. He was right down the road from North Baltimore Aquatic Center. Yep. And he was also running around, had all this extra energy. And I think that's a really cool way for a lot of kids to get into sports because it is an outlet.
Mm-hmm.
It is a way that we can, kids, I was also that way, can express themselves in a really unique way. And doing it and having it be an outlet and something fun is a great way to start with intrinsic motivation.
For sure.
I was wondering if you could talk about your motivation throughout your career and if that changed at all.
Yeah, so motivation is an interesting one. Like I was always a very self-motivated kid. I always had this ability to say to myself, I want to achieve something bigger. I want to be able to push myself a little further. I always was willing to make the sacrifices that other kids were not willing or able to make. Some of it had to do with my talent level was just not on par with the kids I was competing against. So I was not this, supremely, genetically gifted athlete right out of the womb doing handstands. I was something that needed to chip away. And so I enjoyed the process, I think, a lot more than some other kids that are just gifted. And part of that is, there's some people you'll probably interview that love the competition, that despise, Iverson's famous. We're talking about practice, like put the ball in my hand, 5 seconds on the clock. I'm going to, score. I'm dominant when it comes to that clutch situation. I was an athlete that loved being in the gym. I loved the grind. I loved taking the extra turn and being the first person in the gym, being the last one there and saying that I put a little bit more into it than that other athlete. And that's how I was able to bridge that gap between your talent level and my work. And so even from a young age, I loved that idea that if I put in the time and the appropriate work in the right areas, that I could make that gap up. And so it was just something that motivation came from saying, I want to achieve something special. And also growing up there, I was surrounded by a couple of people that had achieved it. So I looked up to them in terms of some idols to say, I want to pursue this in the same way that the one that sticks out in my mind is Dominic Minicucci. Dominic was a 2-time Olympic gymnast. He went to my same gym growing up. So we observed his journey of going to the 88 and 92 Olympic Games firsthand. I started when I was 6 in 86. He went to the Olympics in 88. So our gym was like fully on board with this hometown guy. He was a Staten Island guy and went to 2 Olympic Games. And we were all about like, wow, somebody from our gym did this. Why not me? Why not somebody else from that same background being able to achieve the same thing?
That to me is so cool because for some reason, when you see it, that person, it becomes a lot more real. I always think of, again, Michael Phelps, but Kobe Bryant. He was in Italy at every practice with his dad's team. He's seeing these guys play and he's like, well, they're almost at the highest level. I could maybe do that if I work really hard. You see how the sausage is made.
Yep.
And knowing how the sausage gets made makes it a step process rather than this thing that's so far off conceptually.
Absolutely.
And I really wish people would see that side of it more, is that the hard work that goes in, the early mornings, all these types of things, because in the social media world that we live in, we skip to the end and we just see the glory. And that is so frustrating to me. So all of this hard work obviously did pay off. You have a wonderful life now. You also were able to reach effectively the pinnacle of the fields in the World Championships, and also being an Olympic team member. I was wondering if you could talk to me about that journey, the ascent with USA Gymnastics, and maybe just overall how you felt about that process.
It's a big question. There's a lot goes in from starting out as a kid, and then the one step that probably is an important piece of that puzzle is the collegiate process. The NCAA journey as a gymnast is an important one, especially in the United States, where that is the pipeline to becoming part of Team USA for a lot of non-revenue generating Olympic sports, essentially football, basketball kind of a thing. And so I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Stanford. I moved from the East Coast to the West Coast and became part of Stanford's team, late 90s, early 2000s. We were not very good during those years. Stanford was a powerhouse in the mid-90s, 92, 93, 95, had won. They had some of the top gymnasts in the world, Jair Lynch and Josh Stein, and these absolute superstar powerhouse gymnasts. And it was something that I aspired to be a part of and to contribute. And that was actually, just as a little side note, one of the reasons why I enjoyed so much competing in a team sport on top of gymnastics, which I think most people consider to be an individual sport. But it's one of the reasons why I wanted to go and compete for a collegiate team, because I wanted to contribute to the betterment of a group. And it's one of the reasons why I have my kids both in gymnastics and in team sports. Both of them have incredible value. It's not one or the other. And so I think it's really important to understand that, especially if you're observing gymnastics and you see the Olympic Games and you're saying, this person did this to achieve a gold medal or whatever. What's a better thing to observe is what happened this past Olympic Games in Paris is Steven Edrosek, pommel horse guy as he's known, him performing for the team when it counted. I guarantee you, if you asked him or anyone else on the team what their most memorable moments are in the sport, they will all be team related. None of them will be individual related. And I think it's really powerful to understand that what you can contribute to the masses and to the group is much better in the long run rather than what you contribute to yourself. And so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to go compete for a team and compete for Stanford. And for me, I was able to make some of my closest friends. And while we were not a very strong team during my years there, it was obviously a very impactful time there. I ended up spending 7 years there for training on the team. Took a fifth year, became an assistant coach as I trained for the 2004 Olympic Games. After I graduated, I did become part of Team USA and spent 6 years as a member of Team USA's Gymnastics, which was an incredible time in my life. Moved to the Olympic Training Center during that time in Colorado Springs and lived there for over 4 years, and then moved back to Stanford and helped coach the team for a couple of years. So I stayed involved with the sport at a few levels, but for me, that collegiate experience was absolutely paramount in terms of understanding the value you can contribute to a team and then being able to bring that to Team USA.
Well, I want to double click on that, because something I've observed is that team element or that team mentality, I think, can bring even greater individual benefits in the long run. So we look at a Tiger Woods versus a Roger Federer. Tiger, hyper individualized, didn't care about his competitors, sort of viewed them as like, oh, they're not as good as me. I don't want anything to do with them. Probably wasn't great for his mental health in the long term to view the world that way. But we look at a Federer, for example, who viewed all of his competitors as the greatest gift possible to him because they made him better. Mm-hmm. He ended up playing a Laver Cup and some of these other things with Rafa, some of the best experiences of his life. And it's because he had always viewed them like, these people are helping me to get better every day. They are the mirror for what I'm competing against. They are the ones that literally call me out on the things that I need to do better.
Sure.
And to me, that mentality, especially when you're doing an individual sport at a team level, is something that can be one of the biggest superchargers for performance that I've seen, but also something that not everyone really buys into.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. I think in the Federer situation, I'm speculating here, but he needed to understand his opponent, right? Yeah. So he needed to be able to become the athlete that he was. He needed to understand the strengths and weaknesses of Nadal on the other side of the court to be able to say, how do I maximize what I can do versus his? So there is much more in-depth analysis on your competitor when you're having to combat their strengths and weaknesses, as opposed to Tiger. It's like, if I just do my thing, I'm going to win. You know what I mean? I don't care what the rest of the field is doing. So there is that component. However, there are opportunities even for those individual athletes to compete on a team, right? So, whether it's, the Olympics, or whether they're competing in a collegiate team, or whether it's these other avenues for them to be able to compete in team scenarios. And you can see the ones that dive into it and love it. And they're like, I want to be able to, dive into that pond after, sinking that putt all with my group. You know what I mean? Like, there are the elements where you can see them really enjoying the team component, even if they don't get to do it as often as we might be able to do it in situations like gymnastics.
Yeah, amazing. So can you walk me through your Olympic experience? Obviously,
Sure.
You were coming off one of the highs with the World Championships, and you go into this Olympic experience. It seems like it was maybe one of the pivotal points in your life. And I was wondering if you could maybe tell me the story. I've heard it a couple times before on other podcasts, but I think it's great for us to level set and it really pulled at my heartstrings to hear the first time.
Yeah. So my Olympic journey was an interesting one. I would say that it probably takes a couple of minutes here, so I'll do my best to
take
recount.
As much as you need.
And it feels like a lifetime ago at this point. It's 16 years ago. I can't believe I'm saying that. It's been that long. But a lot of it is still very present because it was a transformative moment in my life, making a decision around what kind of person do you want to be in the face of adversity? And so it started out the way that I had anticipated, leading up to the Olympic trials, which is there's our national championships. There's a few different processes to becoming selected for the Olympic team. And without getting too nuanced into how the selection process is done, it's mostly done by a committee. There's a selection committee, which I actually became part of the selection committee post-career. And I became the athlete representative for USA Gymnastics to help select the teams. So I know both ends of it, being an athlete that is in the selection process, also being a selector. So you have our national championships. That's part of the process, and that qualifies you to Olympic trials. Then there's 2 days of competition at Olympic trials. And then from there, the Olympic team is selected. Now, during the 2008 year, something unique happened in that Paul and Morgan Hamm, the two brothers who were probably some of the most influential male gymnasts probably ever, especially Paul having won the Olympic gold medal in 2004 and the all-around, the first one we've ever had, world champion in 2003 in Anaheim. I mean, every accolade you could possibly have, the two of them combined have had. They were on two Olympic games up to that point, 2000 as 17-year-olds and then, or 18-year-olds, and then 2004. And then they came back to make a run at 2008. And at our national championships, Paul was dominating. Like, he came back out of nowhere. He was nowhere in that quad from 2005 to 2008. He didn't compete. Then he came back just in time to be able to make a run at the Olympics. And both of them looked very good. They were in good shape. And Paul put on a performance the first day of national championships that was otherworldly. Everyone else in the competition was scoring around a 90, if I remember correctly. And he scored like a 94. And a 4-point difference is like, something you can't even, it's Simone Biles versus her competitors. It really is just another level. But on the last event on parallel bars, he got injured. He broke his hand. And so he finished the competition, but he broke his hand. And so Paul had this injury leading into the next part of the process. So he didn't go to Olympic trials, but he got petitioned onto the Olympic squad, and he actually got petitioned onto the Olympic team. And they said that if we have, we were still a month and a half away from the Olympics, if he's healed, he needs to be on the team. But the rest of us, I competed at Olympic trials, and first day I fell on pommel horse, which was an event that I was supposed to contribute on. And I believe that, that was the reason why I was put as an alternate on the team instead of a competitive member. And I knew that was my error. Like, I fully accept that I could have done a better job, and I didn't. And it wasn't just that event. Like, pommel horse, I made a mistake during a national championship as well. And then the only time I hit at the level that I should have during those competitions was the second day of Olympic trials. And I won pommel horse that day. So I was capable, but I didn't show enough consistency. So me and two other athletes were named to the alternates of the team. And Morgan actually made the team as well. So 6 guys were named to the team and 3 alternates. And normally three alternates is a lot, but they knew that there was this injury that was kind of nebulous and they didn't know what was going to happen with Paul. So the next step was, normally that's it. Olympic trials, selection of the Olympic team is done. Now that team trains until you leave for the Olympics. We didn't do that. We went to Olympic training camp, which is part of the process normally, but it's more of a formality for the team to train together. And we went to Colorado Springs where I was, and they made me and a couple of the other athletes compete again, 2 more full times. 2 more full competitions, judges, uniforms, everything. And I hit all my routines. At that point, it looked like Paul was not going to be able to compete. And in fact, right before we were going to leave for China, Paul pulled out, and they said, we're going to make a selection around one of the 3 alternates to go in. And the 3 alternates were myself, Sasha Artemev, and Raj Bhavsar. 2 other incredible competitors, very deserving of those spots. And people have asked me this before in the past, but people would say, do you think that they made the right decision? Do you think that you should have gone in instead? And it's not a point of arrogance or anything like that. But if you are an athlete that does not say yes to that, you shouldn't be in that situation in the first place. So whenever anyone asks me, did they make a mistake not selecting you to go in? I say, yeah, absolutely. I was the one that should have gone in Paul's spot. And again, it's not a point of arrogance. It's belief and a confidence. And I would have been able to contribute to that team's success. I was not selected to be the competing member. They gave that spot to Raj. So at that point, I was devastated. I remember being at the training center. I've never cried so much in my life. Some of it was just emotion in the moment, but also it was this culmination of like these ups and downs of like doing everything, training so hard, feeling like you did enough, not being selected, doing more at the training. You know what I mean? It's like this constant up and down and toying with your emotions with at what at the time is the pinnacle of what you've been doing your whole life, you know, training for this one moment. So we go to China. Me and Sasha are the alternates at that point. And a day before the Olympic Games, Morgan gets hurt. And Morgan has to pull out of the Olympic Games the day before opening ceremony. And so that day, Sasha and I had to go into the Beijing Olympic Training Center, and we had to prove readiness around the two events where they wanted us to be able to contribute. We had to do a floor routine and we had to do a pommel horse routine. But pommel horse was the one where we really needed to show proficiency. And Sasha was reigning bronze medalist on pommel horse, probably one of the best pommel horse performers in the world, but he had an issue with consistency as well. And we both went and we both hit that pommel horse routine. Sasha's better than me on pommel horse. I'm still a contributor, somebody that I could be in that 3-up-3 count, the way if you watch the Olympics this past summer, the way that Nedarasic hit that pommel horse routine, we had that same scenario. In fact, the exact same scenario that happened this past Olympics in Paris happened with us 16 years ago in Beijing. Exact. Finished on pommel horse, needing one pommel horse routine to hit. In the same way that pommel horse guy did it, Sasha ended up going out there and hitting the pommel horse routine for us. We won the bronze medal as a team in 2008 in the same way that the guys did this summer. But the night before, after hitting those routines, our delegates, our national team coordinator, our coaches came in and sat us in the Olympic Village and told us that Sasha was going to be going in instead of me. And that then became the moment where I broke down considerably. I went outside and I called my brother and I was just like, I need to vent to somebody, you know, just, I'm here, I'm ready. I thought I did everything I possibly could. They selected Sasha. The team's going to go forward. This is a moment. This is a moment in your life where you have a path to choose. And either you're going to make a big deal out of it and make it about you, or you're going to make it about the team. Like I said earlier, to me, the team meant everything to me. The team was what we were trying to achieve. I didn't really care about any individual medals. If we can make the team succeed, especially because nobody believed in our team. We had some really interesting things on the media side happen with that team. Without Paul, without Morgan, we were all new Olympians. No one had ever been on an Olympic team with that other group. And so nobody believed that we were able to achieve anything. So I wet my tears. I went back up into the Olympic Village, into that room, and I told them whatever they needed me to do over the next 2 weeks, I would do. You need me to get a water bottle. You need me to carry your bag. You need me to make sure. I was going to be the absolute pinnacle of a teammate and just show them that the team matters more than my individual emotions. And like I said, the team went on to put on what I think is one of the most impressive Olympic performances I'd ever seen. Every guy out there just put on rock star performances. And we came away with a bronze medal. And it was, like I said, a defining moment in my life, saying I was able to contribute in this way. In fact, there's a really cool little, I've definitely shared this before, but me and Sasha were very close because we shared that Olympic moment together in terms of all the selection processes. And he was a kid at the time. He was young. He was in his early 20s. And I was the old man on the team. I was 28 at the time. I was like barely able to walk, you know. And Sasha forgot his uniforms for the Olympics. He didn't bring them to China with him. And so it was like a very young kid moment of like, you didn't bring your uniforms. Like, how could you forget your uniforms? And we had been on other trips in the past and he had done similar things. So it was kind of almost like ready for this to happen. So the day of Olympic team finals, we always wear red in team finals, Team USA on the gymnastics side. And I had my jersey and I said, we were lucky enough, the same size. I gave him my jersey. And so Sasha wore my uniform out on the competition floor that day, won that bronze medal, put on that pommel horse routine with my uniform on. And as soon as he finishes, he points up to the crowd at me. And like, there was this connected bond that we're just like, we kind of did that together. And I'll always have that moment in my head of like him putting on that performance. Some of us like a big brother, like just proud of what he did, what the rest of the guys did. But something I'll absolutely never forget. My Olympic journey and moment did not play out the way that I had envisioned, but I still was able to contribute to the team in a very special and unique way.
Well, I think looking at it now, it's one of the most powerful choices you've probably ever made.
For sure.
You could have lived for the last 16 years resentful or any of these types of things. And in that moment, you made a choice to make it, still like probably when you didn't compete, that was one of the worst moments. Mm-hmm. But I would argue like being there with those guys was probably one of the best moments
for sure
of your entire life. Right?
Absolutely. And it's still, I still look back, the emotions that hit me when I think about the Olympic experience are vast. It's not like this constant high, especially, being there for the medal stuff, but it's a roller coaster. And I think it is for a lot of Olympic athletes, even ones that achieve great things. It's never a straight line to success. And for me, I learned so much about who I am as a person, who I wanted to be as a person, and who I wanted to be as a father. I hadn't had kids yet, but these are the kind of things that I can convey to my daughters now and be like, when you're confronted with, moments that will help define parts of your life, making a decision around this, especially for the betterment of the group, is probably going to be a better route in the long run. And that was one of the decisions I made. I said, what's going to be better for the group here? Put myself and my own emotions aside. And I think from my perspective, in terms of how things played out, I absolutely made the decision that was right for me.
Well, there's something, at least in my mind, really powerful about being part of greatness. Rather than even achieving it yourself, like being part of it is something special. Mm-hmm. I mean, the things that you did, just being there for the guys, like not being a distraction, being an actual like energy source rather than an energy drain, very well could have been a difference maker in Sasha's final routine or something along those lines. I'm very fortunate. I get a lot of work with a lot of team sports now, especially like US level team sports. And it is unbelievable how much the athletes who are sitting, how much the support staff, how much the physios, the trainers, the coaches, all these things.
Everybody matters.
Oh, so much. And one bad seed or one like bad attitude can corrupt like a huge portion of it and be a huge distraction. And so I have to imagine that's maybe a coaching lesson that you learned later on or from that experience, is that like part of greatness is having everyone bought in and filling their role when they need it. But filling your role can feel unbelievably good. Mm-hmm. And it can also be something that doesn't feel great in the moment.
Yeah.
But leads to these incredible like 15, 16-year returns.
Yep.
Which, again, I'm like super grateful to have been part of things like that.
Absolutely. And I really feel like I'm the person I am now. And we'll talk about Powermonkey in terms of how we're still cultivating this same team mentality. But what we're doing today is because of that decision and because of that moment, because of that failure. If you want to look at it as a failure of not being able to reach the point of competing at the Olympic Games. And I am the person I am today. The successes I've had post competitive career have been because of that moment, not in spite of them. So I am grateful for the failure, believe it or not. Yeah.
Well, I'm interested. Can we dive a little bit more into the like perceived failures? So the first one is you didn't compete as well at nationals in the pommel horse, if I remember correctly, or the trials.
I fell the first day. Yeah.
Yep. How do you get over something like that, where you've been training so much for effectively this one trials moment? What goes through your head? What is the framework you use to get past that and actually compete effectively going forward?
That was devastating. Like, I don't know if I have the proper words to be able to convey how challenging that particular moment was. In fact, I don't really watch my older routines very much, but that one, if it ever comes up or, we're at an event and somebody's like, oh, let me pull you up on YouTube, and that one pulls up. I have a really hard time reliving that moment because, it led down the path of what I think was the selection committee's decision to not put me on the team. And it's a feeling, and this has been always my challenge as an athlete, I'm not an incredibly mentally strong athlete. I had to work on it. I had to absolutely work on it. And it's been frustrating for me because I've been around a lot of guys that it comes naturally to, where they don't get phased by the moment. They're just either unfazed or they step up. And for me, it was something that I had to really work on. How do I become someone that can be clutch? How do I become someone that when the moment is biggest, I can shine brightest? And it's always a little bit like, I wish I had that innately. I wish I had that in me naturally. But the thing that was challenging most is I didn't want to let people down. You know, the people that were always in my corner, my family, my brother, my sister, my parents, my collegiate teammates, my coach. Like I wanted to show my coach that the time and effort that he put into me was valid. And I just felt really badly for me not representing him well. So in that moment, it's like one of my things is what I'm going over my head is, I can't believe I did that to him, you know? And so that was like an immediate thought. Like, and that trials that year too was in Philly, right? And I grew up in North Jersey, and Philly's close enough for me to have a substantial number of friends and family in the crowd, like a lot, like hundreds. And these are all people that from when I was, 6 years old, starting in the gym, had supported me along the way. So it was like a collective letdown to me to say all of these people here supporting you and you did not support them. You know what I mean? And I know that's not how they viewed it at all. It's just part of the challenge of me being able to reconcile this mistake and how I'm internally feeling. And so after I left that event, I still had 2 events left to go. Palm horse was my 4th event that night. So I still had rings and I still had vault. Oddly enough, on vault, I subluxed my shoulder that event, my last one. My shoulder popped out. And so I needed to have my shoulder put back into place and basically cinched into place. They put a significant amount of tape and things to keep it in place for the next day's competition. So there was an injury component as well. But at that point, you don't really feel injury very much, whether that's ibuprofen kicking in or adrenaline or just a moment. But I went home very, very upset that day. There's a day break between the 2 competitions. So the next day I spent my friends and family, and almost there was like a sense of relief. Like, okay, that happened. Had a moment to be able to reflect and say, okay, you did fall. Can you come back now and show the gymnastics world what you're really capable of doing? And the second day of Olympic trials was the best competition I've ever had in my life. I hit 6 for 6, all 6 men's events, put on some of the best performances I've ever put on in my life, stuck almost every event. I think I finished 1st or 2nd in the all around that day. Won pommel horse, put the highest pommel horse score up. And that effectively became my last real competition since I didn't get to compete at the Olympics. And so I ended with my best performance ever. And so that's something I'm really proud of. How did I do it? I think some of it had to do with understanding that even with that mistake, everyone still loves you. Everyone still cares for you. Maybe even more because they recognize that you need a little bit of a helping hand. And that's where you can kind of lean more into the support of that team system that you've built into place.
Well, so coming from a coach's perspective, something you said in there is you felt like you let him down.
Yeah.
You felt like all this work, is showing bad on him.
Yeah.
As you a coach now, how would you feel about that? I mean, if I sincerely doubt you would have been like, oh, you let me down and all these things, right?
Yeah, I think some of it is effort is a part of it. If you have an athlete that's not putting the effort in that you anticipate as a coach, that's different. I put all the effort in the world into it. I think me and my coach had a really close bond. He trusted me. I trusted him. And so he knew that my competition was also a reflection on him. And I wanted to, I took a lot of pride in being an athlete that he could be proud of, in the gym, outside of the gym. The way that I represented myself was a reflection of him coaching me. And so he knew that basically I was always trying to represent him and our team to the highest level. And so now when I'm coaching, I'm not coaching at that level. I've worked with the national team guys now, and I still follow it very closely, but I don't work with competitive gymnasts very much now. But with the people that I do work with, if the effort is there, that's all that matters to me. The end result happens. If it happens, it happens for you. If you make that skill, you win that competition, whatever it might be, great. But the effort and the intention behind it is really what I gravitate towards. Are you listening? Are you putting in the time and the effort towards being able to achieve those things? And if the outcome happens, great, but it's not the thing that resonates with me.
I mean, that's from everything I've read, the number one like parenting advice that I've ever seen is basically you never reward outcome, you always reward effort.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, on the other side of that, so the pommel horse, obviously something perhaps you could have controlled. Whatever happens when you're competing. When you get to the actual Olympics, you effectively, from what it seems like, did about as well as you could.
Yes.
And it wasn't in your control that you were not on the team that was competing. From a psychological perspective, how was that different? Was it more painful, less painful? And how did you navigate that? Because from an athlete perspective myself, obviously not at the same level, I can reconcile when I've done something wrong. I could have worked harder. I could have done X, Y, Z. But when something is outside of my control, the best athletes are like, oh, I can't control it. It's uncontrollable. But for me, it's like, what the hell? Like I put in my full effort.
Yeah. If you lean into that, you'll never be satisfied. You're never going to internally feel like things are okay. What you have to lean into is that this is the process that's been selected. This is the one that we've all agreed upon. Maybe it's not perfect, but it is the process that we have determined to be optimal for team success. And if you say, I've bought into that process, then you have to also buy into the selector's selection. And so is it perfect? No. There's always going to be someone that's left out that feels like there's a mistake being made. And in that case, I was the one, and my coach feels the same way, that I was the one. And there's a lot of other people that, felt that they made the right decision. And the outcome, the bronze medal shows that the selectors did a great job in selecting a team that could do a good job. And what you mentioned about everyone having a collective, seat at the table when it came to that eventual outcome. Absolutely. But I will say that it's challenging, but I would never be able to feel comfortable unless I believed in the process. And can the process be better and tweaked? Sure. But I know that everyone on that, the selection committee, their goal was the same, to try to put the best possible team out on the floor. Did I believe I should have been out there? Yes. But their goal in their head, they were trying to put the best team out on the floor. So I believe that they were trying to do the best for Team USA as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. Looking at more broadly Team USA, I was wondering if you could talk to me about the experience of being on the team, training with the team in Colorado Springs, being at the Olympics, just the overall process, because it seems like yours was even more disruptive and uncertain than most people's.
Yeah, I would say so.
But that process overall seems like, frankly, kind of a shit show. You're going to this new country, and you're not used to the same conditions that you had at home. And I was wondering, how do you bring your best to this foreign land with all these other athletes, all this other stimuli? That to me seems like a very, very difficult challenge. And I'm wondering how you approach it, but also how broadly USA tries to make it as similar.
Sure. I think every sport does it slightly differently. Like the USOPC kind of oversees things, especially when it comes to a USOPC or an IOC event, right? Whether that's the Olympic Games or potentially Pan American Games, they oversee that event in terms of logistics for all of the delegations, in terms of all the NGBs. But they also put it more to the NGB themselves, USA Gymnastics, USA Swimming, to say what's going to be best for your athletes in that particular scenario. So mostly it's on USA Gymnastics to make sure that we're prepared for that particular event. Less on USOPC side and more on the NGB to take care of what's needed for their particular athletes. On a side note, the Olympic Training Center, I had an amazing time with OTC. It was very challenging for me to move from Stanford to OTC. In fact, the first 2 years, I was looking for any reason to leave because I wasn't having the results that I wanted. Coming off the 2004 Olympics, I probably should have been national champion a few times. I probably should have been somebody that was a leader of the team. And I kept making mistakes that were uncharacteristic at our national championships. And it left me off of teams that I should have been on. And I looked at it as this transition from coming from a really comfortable coaching relationship at Stanford that had created some real success for me, to now learning a whole new system at the OTC. And it took me a really long time to get into the rhythm of the way that things were done in Colorado. But once I did get into the rhythm, I flourished there. It became like a really great spot for me because the coach was just perfect for me. He was the perfect coach for the self-motivated. He understand how to get the most out of you on a daily basis, and understanding that not, everyone's an individual. Everyone needs specific, pokes and prods to be able to get the most out of them. And I was a particular athlete, and he was able to understand how to do that. But in terms of like, you're going to China, the food's different, time zone is different, training environment, the equipment, all of it, right? One, we try to recreate things in our home setting as much as we can. As much as you possibly can, you try to prepare for what those end outcomes look like so that you're as prepared as possible with the things that you can have an effect on. So we brought in the same equipment, the equipment that we knew was going to be competed on in Beijing. We brought that in and changed out all of our equipment. So we were on the exact same equipment. We started to train at different times throughout the day, not 12 hours different like you would, but we start to train at different hours or wake up early and try to compete at a different time. I think maybe when we were doing a pre-record, I told you that the 2006 World Championships in Denmark, it's a qualification process to World Championships, and our time slot to compete on a team, we had to wake up at 3:34 in the morning to go to the gym to start our warm-ups, to start training, because there's so many teams that need to compete throughout the day. So there are these things that you don't normally think are possible barriers that you try to put into your training regimen as much as you possibly can to be able to prepare for those things. The more experience you have internationally, the better you're going to be at it. So I was pretty fortunate. I had been on 17 international assignments over the course of my USA career. So I've been all over the world. I've been to Ukraine. I've been to Japan. We went to there's an Olympic test event prior to the Olympics, which I was a part of. Went to China, competed in the same venue, competed on the same equipment. I went through the whole process 6 months before the Olympic Games. So there are those events that allow you to prepare, both in terms of what the travel looks like, what the living experience is going to be like. And then on top of that, the layer that USOPC contributes is to make it as comfortable for the USA athletes as possible. And I would say that USA does this at a higher level than anyone else. The USA House, which is like where the parties are held, and all the donors and the TV people and anyone coming in to be able to meet the athletes. The USA House is amazing. It's a great environment, good food, those kind of things. And then they normally rent out a facility where they put a gym up. They, house you separately. All the athletes can go. They have their own food. You don't have to eat the food in the village. USA has their own food. So USA absolutely goes above and beyond in terms of making sure that the athletes in the Olympic Village have what they need to be able to perform at their highest level.
Amazing. And then if we rewind that back to when you're just like training over the course of the year,
yep.
What is that like for you? So I'd watched the Weight of Gold documentary that Miachel Phelps put together. Something that I was very surprised about was the essentially lack of funding for stipends and these types of things. If you're trying to do this full time, it seems like the money and these types of things make it kind of difficult to do anything or even get some of the things you need. I was wondering if you could talk to me about what the life of an Olympic athlete is like. Obviously, there isn't as much financial upside like you'd expect in some other of the more mainstream sports. Mm-hmm. And I'm really interested to understand the perspective of that.
Sure. So there's very little, if any, money in even gymnastics being a premier sport during the Olympic Games. It's interesting for 2 weeks every 4 years, and then it falls off the map, especially men's gymnastics, right? Every once in a while you get a Simone Biles, every once in a while. Simone is unique in the sense that she has, in the same way that Phelps has, created a revenue stream through sponsors and through her incredible status and ability to be an outlier. The reality for most Olympic athletes is vastly different, right? I left Stanford because I couldn't afford to live there anymore. I wasn't a student anymore. The stipend that I was getting for USA Gymnastics for being part of the national team was not nearly enough to live in Palo Alto or even remotely close to Palo Alto. So I had to leave. That was one of the main reasons why I left. It was just not being able to afford a lifestyle to keep training where I was. So the fortunate thing from my perspective is that the Olympic Training Center is meant to help create a lifestyle where costs are taken care of. So this is not possible for every athlete. It's not possible even for every sport. We do have 3 main training centers in the US. The main one is in Colorado Springs. Then there's Chula Vista, which houses a lot of summer sports, and there's Lake Placid, which houses a lot of winter sports. But if you are lucky enough to have a sport that has a house in one of the training centers, and you are an athlete that gets invited to live at the Olympic Training Center, a lot of those costs are taken care of for you. So I didn't have any rent. I lived at the training center, and I tell people that I had the nicest room in all of the training center, which I think I did. Top floor, vaulted ceilings, facing Pikes Peak every morning, seeing Pikes Peak, waking up closest to the stairs to go down the cafeteria. I had the room picked out. It was awesome. So you have housing taken care of. You have food taken care of. You go down, I walked a flight of steps, and anything that I wanted was available to me from a nutrition standpoint. When I was there, they were building, a recovery center. You have access to sports psychologists. You have access to nutritionists. You have access to sports science department. So there is access, especially if you seek it out. Is there money? No, very little. Like enough to be able to maybe get a meal every once in a while outside of the training center. And like, it's a very basic living outside of what is given to you. But at least as an athlete, you can train, but you're not going to be making a living out of it. You're not, putting into a 401k and like seeing that grow and like creating a future for yourself. It's very moment by moment. And I think that's one of the fears why Weight of Gold is a part of the conversation, is because we're all so caught up in the moment of trying to define ourselves around this particular athletic achievement. And there's very little thought into what's next. I can't even comprehend what job I'm going to have when my competitive career is over, let alone what kind of person I'm going to be, or, whether I'm going to have, some kind of portfolio that's going to help me, finance my later years. None of that is really a concern. And I think that's probably one of the areas where the USOPC and the NGBs can do a better job, is helping these athletes try to figure out paths towards financial freedom, financial success, and successes in terms of career paths once their inevitable competitive careers are over. And there's been conversations around that. There's different programs, jobs programs, things like that USOPC and NGBs are working on, but it definitely is not enough. And I think Weight of Gold, when you see Apollo Ono and you see Michael Phelps, some of the biggest names struggle with this post-Olympic career, it clearly is not being done. If it's not being done for them, how's it being done for,
literally anyone
the
else,
shooters or the weightlifters or the gymnasts that are not the ones that are at the top of the podium or the top of the, financial breakdown of what the athletes are making. So I would say that my Olympic experience was benefited by having the ability to take advantage of the training center. And I had, I feel very lucky to have been in that situation. But it still is one that's based around a very finite period of time. When it's over, like, we're happy you were here. Please move along. We have a bed that's meant for somebody else now.
Honestly, to me, outside looking in, that was a little bit horrifying. Yes, you're treated well when you're here, but as an athlete, you should be explicitly 100% focused on training, or there's obviously balance and things involved,
Yeah.
but you don't really have time to learn business skills. You don't really have time to do these other things. And if you're not also given some sort of income that you can invest or do whatever afterwards, when you're done, you're just sort of thrown out in the world and figure it out.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of Olympians do. A lot of people who are on these national teams do, because they have an unbelievable work ethic, a lot of these other things. But you're also wildly unprepared for the world. Granted, you went to Stanford. You probably learned quite a bit.
I'm not using my major very much. You know what I mean? It was a different path. But I get your point is valid and it's well taken. And it's an important one, because there is also a difference between the athletes, especially the athletes that were incredibly talented early on and that didn't go to college and that just became an elite athlete straight out of high school. they don't even have, the resources that come along with college education to be able to say, I can lean into that after I'm done. So it becomes harder for them to be able to say, well, how now can I take what I learned in college or my degree and apply that in a new way? Again, not to say that I or many of the athletes are using their college degrees, but I do think that, my time spent at Stanford did in some way help me transition away from being a competitive athlete into someone who's contributing in the business world or into the real world.
So I want to transition into how you transitioned.
Mm-hmm.
But before I do that, I want to dive a little bit more into burnout.
Mm-hmm.
So these conditions, it seems like it can make burnout pretty prevalent.
Yeah.
Obviously, in that documentary, we talked a lot about it. I was wondering if you could explain to me maybe when that happened to you. If I recall something around 2004,
Mm-hmm.
You were feeling not as excited about it as the past. And
Yeah.
I'd love to hear about that process.
Yeah, I know so many people's Olympic journeys have really tough moments like this, whether it's injury related or the mental side just taking hold. I had a moment that is still very fresh for me in terms of how impactful it was and how it made me feel, where I was training for the 2004 Olympic Games. I had for Athens, I had just made national team for the first time in 2003. I was still a younger gymnast, but I was doing very well at the time. This is after I graduated from Stanford and was prepping for 2004. And at that time, I wasn't on the Stanford team anymore. I was training for USA and I was new to the national team. So I felt like I needed to do everything I possibly could to show selection committee, the other guys on the team, the other coaches, that I belonged here, that I belonged on this team, and that I belonged in the conversation to be part of the Athens Olympics. And that team was stacked. That team that went to Athens and won a silver medal, and Paul won the gold medal, was probably one of the most talented group of Olympic men's gymnasts we've ever had. Superstars across the board, all former Olympians and world championship team members and medalists, and all people that had like incredible accolades, versus our team in 2008 that was very different. So I knew that I had to do something more to be able to say, I belong here with these guys. And so what I did was not the right thing looking back, but I shut out everything else in my life. Friends, family, no other pursuits out of training. I would sleep in the gym. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I wouldn't even talk to my best friends. I said, talking to you is taking away from me spending time in the gym. And so I went down this really deep hole of saying, I need to dive so deeply into training to prove that I should be in consideration from these spots. And it's the way that I'm going to achieve things. And in some level, it had worked for me in the past, where it's I just did more than other people in terms of time in the gym and effort, and it worked. But I went so far off the deep end that I missed out on being able to communicate my true feelings to anyone. My coach, didn't speak with him. My friends, my outlets were gone. So finally, I would go home and I would just stand in front of the mirror and had these mantras and sayings to myself that I would just look at myself and felt like I was Rocky, training for this Ivan Drago at the end, that I needed to just do it all on my own. He's up in the mountains in Russia training in the snow. I need to do the same thing. You know what I mean? Putting yourselves in these situations that are just not necessary. And it kind of culminated with me having just a complete meltdown, sitting in the gym, crying my eyes out, just not being able to take turns, not being able to communicate, not being able to talk to my coach, not being able to do anything because I had nothing left inside of me. I was just so emotionally and mentally drained that it impacted every aspect of my life. And I ended up performing very, very well at the 2004 Olympic trials. I hit 12 for 12. I crushed it. In fact, I surprised a lot of people with how well I performed, so much so that I made it to the Olympic squad. 10 guys that went to that same Olympic journey that I talked about in 2008, went back to the training center, and they took 8 guys to Athens, and I was one of the 10 that was left out. So I just missed making the 2004 Olympic squad. But at what expense? When that whole journey was over, I didn't want to have anything to do with the sport for a while. And that's another reason why I moved. I was I need a change of scene. I need to get away from this and reset my expectations and the way that I approach this, if a weight is going to be realistic for me. I would absolutely do that portion of my journey over differently, even though the outcome in terms of what I did in that competition was positive, not at the expense that it took on me. Like the mental toll was, and especially like friends are so important to me, and like my relationships and my coach relationship. And I was an asshole. I treated people like shit. And it wasn't fair to them. It wasn't fair to the person that I thought I wanted to be. And so like looking back, I would absolutely change the way that I approached that journey because it had a significant impact in terms of just my well-being.
Yeah. I think something, and it seems like this is what happened, is you're like, oh, if I'm not doing that other stuff, I'm focusing.
Yeah.
That's energy I don't have to waste, but you're actually wasting more energy ignoring literally basic human necessities, which is social connection and these types of things.
Having a balance. Yeah.
Yeah. How many Olympians, how many athletes do you think fall into a similar trap where they're so linearly focused that it actually hurts them more than it helps them?
Probably more than we realize. And I would say probably collegiate athletes too. I wouldn't just say it happening to, there's so much on the line for a lot of these NCAA athletes too, that they probably do something similar. You know, they put themselves into, I would say the team sports, it's a little bit, maybe less prevalent because you're surrounded by this group effort where like, hey, we're collectively working towards an end goal. For as much as I continue to lean into the idea of men's gymnastics being a team sport, you can absolutely lead into the individual side of the sport if you wanted to. So how prevalent, it's hard to say, but I would go about saying that it's probably much more prevalent than we maybe give it credit for, or we probably acknowledge.
And how did you navigate getting out of that really deep hole? I doubt it was just like, oh, I thought about it differently.
No, it was actually being very vulnerable and being able to open up and apologize to a lot of those people and just be like, hey, it was a really terrible spot. And I'm sorry for the way that I acted and for the person that I was. And it's like, it's not the person that I ever intended to be, but it just snowballed into, this really weird version of myself. And so some of it was just being honest with the people that I loved and cared for and still do today, that it was a version of myself that I'm not proud of. And that didn't work. It didn't work. And it's hard to say that it didn't work because the outcome was good, but the expense that it took was not worth it at all. And I think I could have had the same outcome if I would have pursued a much more open and positive relationship with expressing those things. Like maybe that means having a sports psychologist available to speak to. And we didn't have that back then. It was still kind of an emerging thing to have access to someone to speak to outside of your coach or your teammates or your friends. So I think it was me being able to say I made a mistake and being honest with that, which is really difficult to do. But then, like I said, also changing environments and being able to say, like, I need a fresh start. I need to be able to start over. I'm going to go to Colorado. I'm going to restart and recharge. And then lastly, it's finding a balance. Like, I became much more capable of having a life outside of the gym and being able to say that this is as important as my time in the gym. So I dove deeply into like art. I enjoy art, drawing, and those kind of things. And so I dove deeply into that. I would take some classes at some of the colleges, and whether it be SCC in Colorado College or UCCS, those things are available to you as an athlete. You can go and take some classes at some of the local universities. So I took art history classes. I took some psychology classes. I took classes to be able to keep my mind occupied. I dove deeply into wine. I don't know if I should tell this story, but there's a funny story about the training center. Alcohol is not allowed at the OTC. Have you heard the story?
I have not, no.
All right, so this is interesting. It's funny. I moved the training center at 24. I was there until I was 28, 29. And so I was of age. I was, I think a very responsible young man. And I enjoyed wine. So, but alcohol is not allowed on campus. There are some athletes that are underage, but I was like, I'm old enough. Like I should be able to have a glass of wine if I want to have a glass of wine. So I put a bar in my room. Me and my roommate, Yuki Tamita, awesome dude, one of the best gymnasts around. Me and him, we had a kick-ass room, but we put a bar in our room. And Thursday practices at the training center for us were light days. So every Wednesday night before our light day, I would have wine Wednesdays, and I would invite all of the of-age athletes from the other sports over to my room, and we do a wine taste. And it wasn't about like drinking a ton and like getting hammered. It was like, yeah, we're going to taste wine. And like the only way that I would invite people is if they would be willing to, like, I'll provide the wine, but I want you to be able to like sit and enjoy it. And we'll like take tasting notes and you tell me what, and like, I want you to be able to enjoy this. Not about like drinking a lot. It's about like just doing something as an adult that's outside of the gym. And it was awesome. Like I would have athletes from all different sports over in my room and we would hang out. And one day I got a knock at the door. Ding, ding, ding. It's like middle of the day. And I looked at a little peephole and it's the head of the training center. And he's an awesome guy. He has since passed away tragically, but he was one of my favorite people. Mike English. Mike was an Olympian himself in sport shooting. His daughter went on to be an Olympic gold medalist in shooting as well. And their son was on the gymnastics team, the club program at the training center. So we knew Mike very well. And he was a gem of a person, like an absolute phenomenal guy. And I see he's there and I'm like, and he has a plate of cheese. And I'm like, oh shit. And I open up the door and he's like, hey Dave, what's up? I hear that you have some wine in the room. I brought some cheese. Can we chat? And I was like, I'm getting kicked out. I'm like, oh my God, I'm out of here. So he came in and he was one of the most understanding and just kind people when it came to responding to the situation, even though he didn't have to be, right? He said, listen, I know you're an adult. I know you're responsible. If anything ever happens here and, you know, somebody drinks too much or something happens, you're out of here. Like you're going to be out of the training center. But I was like, I respect that and I will adhere to what you're saying and I will be responsible in the way that I have been. And he's like, okay, then you can keep having your wine in your bar. Just don't let anything ever happen. And I always appreciated his ability to treat me as an adult in a situation where that didn't have to happen.
What an incredible way to handle that situation.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I mean,
oh my God. I was like shit in my pants. And then like he came in and like treated me like an adult. I was like, this guy gets it. Like I appreciated that so much.
I mean, that's what you want from someone who's overseeing that.
Yep.
That organization. That is unreal.
Yeah. Great guy. I miss him very much. He's a big part of the Olympic journey for a lot of athletes and especially myself.
Yeah. I'm very sorry to hear that he is passed.
Yeah.
On the topic of wine, I think it's, so I'm not a wine drinker, but I've read quite a lot of books about wine. I'm like kind of a nerd about it. I like the wine Bible and these types of things.
Sure.
I think like tasting wine and going down the rabbit hole is fascinating because you're training a sense that historically we do not train. I mean, you're a gymnast, you're training your body, you're doing these types of things, you're really fine tuning these things. But the idea that we can train our sense of taste and our sense of smell, to me is like such a neat thing that we can refine these areas of our brain or these areas of our presence that we haven't refined before. And like most people don't. It's like, oh, I can literally taste things that you cannot taste.
Right.
And that to me is like a very interesting pursuit. And it's also a very curious pursuit.
Absolutely. Yeah. It makes you ask questions and makes you think about things in a little bit more of an interesting way. And so, yeah, wine to me, I don't drink a lot, but I appreciate the process that comes along with it. And living here in the Pacific Northwest, close to some wine country here has been actually a very, very fun thing moving from the East Coast back out to the West. So take advantage of it as much as I can.
That is amazing. Well, I want to shift gears here just a little bit to talk about how you started your coaching journey. So from everything that I've heard, you've said that you did not intend on being a coach. You actually were actively against it. Yeah. But now here we are, you're a coach. And that is, I think, what you take a tremendous amount of pride in doing. So I'm wondering how do you 180 on that?
For years, when I was a competitor, it's very selfish pursuit. You know, you're an athlete too. When you're an athlete, it's very selfish and you have to do what's best for you. You have to do what's best for you to be able to achieve the goals that you've set for yourself and for your team, whatever it might be. And so when I was a competitive athlete, I didn't think about coaching at all. I just wanted to compete and perform. And so the coaching side to me didn't even resonate. In fact, the thing that made me verbally say it often is like, I don't ever want to coach. Like, this is not for me, was seeing how incredible my coach was. And I was like, I just don't have that in me. He had the ability to basically read my mind. We would go into the gym. 7, 8, 10 of us, whatever it would be at the Olympic Training Center. And all of us have different approaches to training. Like one of the guys on our team that went on to win the bronze medal, Joey Haggerty, incredible gymnast, but trained and did things in a particular way. He didn't need to do anything. He would warm up for 5 minutes. He would train for 45 minutes and he'd go home and he'd play video games. And that was the way that and it was always frustrating for us, like, because we'd have to be in the gym like 6 hours, 8 hours. And he's like, I can do everything in 45 minutes. I'm done. It's like, how do you do that? Right? Yuki, the other person I mentioned, my roommate, was methodical. He would warm up for 4 hours and then he would be very strategic with and so our coach was able to understand how to maximize each of those individuals' approach to coming into the gym before we even come in. And then he would change the plan of the day according to what he noticed, what we were wearing, how our hair was. We wouldn't even have to say anything. And he'd be like, okay, today we're going to modify what the training plan is because I can see that you probably need to push a little harder today, or we're going to back off a little. It was incredible. And it was at such a level that I was like, I don't know what that is as a coach. I don't know what you're doing. And if I can't be a coach at your level, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to be a half-ass coach. I don't want to be someone that's like, okay at this. I was like, this is the type of person that should be a coach. This person that's able to have all of these non-physical tools, not things that you can have on a piece of paper, that put him in a realm of coaching that, is a Bob Bowman or these others that just have things that allow you to just get things out of athletes that those athletes just don't even know are there. And I would actively tell people, and other coaches would always say, you're going to coach one day, you're going to coach one day. And I'd be like, I don't want to do this at all. So the only thing that I had put onto my agenda was, I want to win a national championship in college. I want, like, that to me, like getting an NCAA ring was a really big thing on my checklist. Like I always wanted to get that ring. And like I said, during my 4 years at Stanford, we were terrible. We were not a good team. We were kind of like Bad News Bears those years. And I had the opportunity to go back to Stanford after 2008. I came back and I had just blown my knee out, which maybe it'll come up. And I had surgery and I was offered the assistant coaching job at Stanford. And I was still very close with the team, very close with the coach who's still there today. And they had just come off of finishing second place the year before, and they should have won. And it was at Stanford and they lost. They should have won. And I said, I think I can help this team get over the hump and win a national championship. They hadn't won since 95. And so I went and I loved working with the team. And I had just come off of competing. So the guys, I could communicate with them differently than the coach could. I could look at it very much from an athlete perspective. I could still do a lot of the stuff that they were doing. And so I was able to kind of understand the challenges that they were going through a little differently than our head coach was. And so I think I was able to contribute just the missing piece from what they had. Talent was there, skill level was there, coaching mechanics were there. I was able to give them a perspective that they were maybe lacking. And we won. We won that year. The 1 year that I signed a contract for, got my NCAA ring. And I said, that's it. I'm done. Like, I'm moving to Italy. I'm an Italian citizen. I was going to move to Italy and I was actually going to consider getting into the wine industry. And so I moved to Rome. My father grew up in Rome. We had an apartment there. And so my intention was to get away from gymnastics and try to do something completely different. And something weird happened. Like, I went skiing in Austria. One of my friends from the Olympic world is on the Austrian gymnastics team, and his parents were ski instructors. And he took me to Innsbruck, where they had 2 Winter Olympic Games, and this beautiful, incredible mountain. And I had never skied before, and I had already blown my knees out twice. And so I was always a little protective of trying to do something that might injure me for gymnastics. I was like, I'm done with gymnastics. Let me give this a try. Get to the top of the mountain, go down within 50 feet, legitimately 50 feet. I fell and I blew my knee out. Like, you won't believe, I could still see the 6-year-olds laughing at me. But I got up and I had to walk back up the mountain. So I walked back up to take the ski lift down. And everything that I had done in terms of setting up that next phase of my life was changed because of that injury. I had to have surgery in Rome. During my rehab, I started doing rehab at a club gym in Rome, club gymnastics gym. And I started working with the kids a little bit. Like, someone was doing rehab, someone was working with the kids. And I started to really enjoy working with these kids. And it was helping me learn the language a little bit more, falling in love with gymnastics in a different way with kids and with people that were new to the sport. And I started to maybe I like this a little bit more than I thought I would. And right around that time, as I started rehabbing, the CrossFit scene had started to emerge. End of 2008, beginning of 2009, for me a little bit. First CrossFit Games I think was 2007, and so early on we started to see these workouts starting to come up that had gymnastics in them, like people doing handstands and people getting on rings and bars. And for me, it was like, oh, this might be a cool way to stay fit, stay, keep your body in shape if you're done competing. And then I looked at it as an opportunity to be able to help people that didn't grow up with the sport. And that completely transformed my idea of helping and building the sport of gymnastics. And coaching is my avenue of trying to do that. That's really why I coach. I love seeing people succeed and overcome things and be able to achieve things they didn't think they were capable of. But my whole goal is to help build the sport of gymnastics, to be able to show people how incredible of a sport it is on its own, but also as a building block to anything else they want to go on to do. And so it's a lot of story in there to tell you that I didn't intend to become a coach. It more found me through an odd circumstance, through an injury. And now I've found this path where I absolutely just adore the fact that I get to work with people that didn't grow up with the sport and help them find the love for it too.
That's awesome. And so in practice, how is coaching different as you do it from how you had viewed it as an athlete?
So let's see. Again, the cohort of people that I work with is very different than elite athletes. So starting there, right? I'm not training people to go to the Olympics. I'm not training people to win an NCAA championship. I'm training people now that are doing it because they love it and because they found it later in life and because they want to pursue new challenges. So this weekend I was in Seattle, right, teaching a Powermonkey course, and we had 25 people ranging from 14 to probably mid 60s, all different age ranges and skill levels, no gymnasts, right? And we're teaching them how to become comfortable in their hands, or doing a handstand, or doing ring work, and where do I place my hands on the rings. And so the approach is completely different in terms of how to prep someone for competitive side of the sport versus training someone for longevity and for enjoyment, because you can become an elite athlete and maybe enjoyment is a part of that, but it doesn't have to be. And in fact, enjoying the process for a lot of athletes is not part of the process. It's just end result. Am I going to achieve it? And maybe if it's fun, cool. But for this group of people, the enjoyment is they don't have to come. They didn't have to pay money to come and hang out with me. They didn't have to, spend time going to the gym and working on hands. They do it because they love it. And so already we're in a better starting place because I know that they're coming there because they want to be there as opposed to they have to be there. So my interaction with them is much more about how do we continue to grow this love for something new and cultivate that interest. So for me, it's about keeping the sport interesting, keeping it fun, and keeping it accessible. And so that's my constant challenge is I'm working with people that didn't grow up with the sport. And the two comments that I get endlessly whenever I'm teaching these courses, we have our camps, which maybe we'll talk about. But the two things that I hear endlessly with these people that didn't grow up with our sport is, man, I really wish my parents would have put me in gymnastics when I was a kid. And I can't wait to put my kids in gymnastics when they're old enough. Or if I ever have a kid, gymnastics is going to be the first sport that I put them into. And that tells me that we're doing something right. And also that we have some potential growth for our sport. And so I'm looking at, hey, I want to grow the sport of gymnastics, and this is my route doing it. When you're done with the competitive side of the sport, there's really normally 3 avenues to stay involved. You can go and coach at a club gym at an NCAA level. You can go to the stunt world and become a stunt man, or you can go to the circus and become, go to Cirque or traveling circus. And those have always been like the 3 avenues to stay involved with the sport in some way.
Well, I saw a great video of you in 2010 at the Victoria's Secret fashion
show. Oh, you
show
saw that.
So,
yes.
Yeah. So there might be a 4th and a half avenue as well.
I would say that's part, the performing, the circus.
I guess circus activity.
That is a story in and of itself. And I actually bring that up often. It was right before I met my wife, right when I moved back from Italy. And my partner with Powermonkey had a company in New York, Shane Garrity, amazing dude. He had been a gymnast at Syracuse himself, grew up in the sport at a pretty high level, and then opened up a production and acrobatic company in New York City. They were the Knicks, halftime show crew, and they did a bunch of stuff in the city. And he hired me to be one of the gymnasts for the 2010 Victoria's Secret show. They wanted gymnasts for it. And it ended up being like 8 or 9 of us. Most was national team and Olympic team members. And it was one of the coolest, most interesting, bizarre kind of things where, gymnasts got to showcase our stuff.
For sure.
Huh?
That's a once in a lifetime.
Oh my God. It was a blast. And the YouTube video is still up there, and I get a lot of FaceTime on there. So I would highly recommend checking it out. So
I'll link it in.
Yeah, it's fun. It was fun. So that was my one of my performing gigs when I came back from living in Italy and getting back into the swing of things again. Yeah. So those are the avenues, but CrossFit and fitness has allowed a new avenue, and we pursued that one to be able to not work with kids, but work with adults.
Amazing. Well, I really want to take a deep dive into the camps and Powermonkey Fitness. Before that, I'm interested if with your coach's brain now, you could maybe reevaluate yourself as an athlete. Obviously, you're not working with the elite athletes now, but I would imagine there's insights from not elite athletes that you might be able to measure back on yourself.
Yeah, I mean, if I was coaching myself, like what would I tell myself? Those kind of things?
Yeah, what would you have done differently? Obviously, 2004 was a big one.
Yeah.
But was there something about your process? Was there something about your mindset?
I would tell myself to relax a little bit. I was like a super high strung, like kid growing up when it came to like training. I was saying, I always tried to do the things that everybody else didn't want to do. I convinced my gym owner when I was in high school to give me a key to the gym so that I could go do morning sessions by myself. Cause he didn't want to go in the gym. He's like, I'll give you a key. You go do strength by yourself. And I would go and work out in the mornings, 6 a.m. before school. I would go do that by myself before school and then before afternoon sessions. And I would just tell myself to chill a little bit. Like those things all helped in terms of the end result. But I also think I said, there needs to be a balance, and to give myself the ability to step away from the gym and enjoy some things outside of the gym that I almost like actively told myself I shouldn't enjoy, like going to a party or going to, an event that all your other friends are going to. And I would like actively say, no, you're not going to go do that. It might be fun, but it's not what an elite athlete should do. And I think those are mistakes. I think, there's a balance for sure. And like, you don't have to go off the deep end in terms of partying, but you also need to have a social life. You need to be able to keep those human connections visible and part of what you're doing. And I think if I was able to speak to that 15, 16-year-old Dave who's kind of prepping for his collegiate run, I would just say like, find and keep the balance as much as you possibly can, because it's going to make your entire journey more enjoyable. And I think the outcomes are going to be the same, if not better, because of it.
Through that same lens, you were talking about maybe some of the drawbacks of working harder or avoiding some of the fun things that you did. Outside of the extra hard work, what do you think separated yourself as a competitor, as a gymnast?
I was very receptive to my coaches. I think most of the coaches if you speak to any of my coaches over the years, they'll probably tell you I was very coachable. I listened really well. I was able to maybe not always implement what I was being told, but I was actively trying to think about everything that was being put in front of my plate. So from a coachability standpoint, I always prided myself on being an athlete that coaches wanted to work with, and also a teammate that teammates wanted to be, to learn from. And lastly, to be a leader of those teams. I took a lot of pride. I was captain of the Stanford teams, captain of Team USA for most of my time. And I always took a lot of pride in the sense that if something needed to be done, that they always could count on me for it. Like if something was needed in the gym or if a jersey was needed, that they knew that I was prepared at any moment to be able to help contribute to the team and make sure that we knew what was going on. The team, like Dave was our rock when it came to succeeding as a team. So being a leader and being coachable to me were absolute paramount things that I leaned into as an athlete outside of what my the hard work or whatever athletic ability I had.
Well, those are things that make you better, but also make other people better. And you get that reinforcing effect in such a unique way.
Yeah.
You were also around so many other elite athletes. Were there things that you observed them doing that you were like, oh, that's why they are how they are? Was there anything you're like, something maybe you didn't do, but you're like, oh, like, I get it.
Sure. I think there's probably a lot of those stories. There's one or two that really stick out to me, but time spent at Stanford is unique. So Stanford, I think, is one of the most elite combinations of athletic achievement and academic achievement that there is in the NCAA realm. And it's very cool to walk around Stanford's campus and be surrounded by a concert pianist or someone who's, working on cancer research as well as an Olympic gold medalist, all in the same. And nobody really cares at Stanford. Everyone just wants to know that what you're doing is at a very high level, and then they move on. So it's not really like a fervent fan base at Stanford and for anything. But being surrounded by those athletes, I lived with all the water polo players, all the basketball players, some of the baseball players, all the volleyball players. And so we lived in a house all together. And so seeing them train, we would go and train with them every once in a while too. So I would go and train with the water polo team and try to tread water and be like, I'm going to die today. And some of those names are some of the biggest names in water polo, Tony Acevedo and Peter Hudnut, and these names that have been on multiple Olympic teams and the names of the sport. And so just being around them and seeing the way that they trained was super helpful. The Olympic Training Center is another level of that, right? And being able to be surrounded by the elite of the elite in weightlifting or archery or pentathlon or all these other sports that are housed at the Olympic Training Center or were, was very powerful in terms of seeing what athletes were doing, what was working, what was not. But there was a particular story that I always kind of come back to because the name is very well known. But when I was in Beijing at the 2008 Olympics, I would go, Team USA had put together, we were at the American College of Beijing, I think, and they had rented out the entire campus and they put together 24-hour fitness within the training facility for us. And one day I was in there just riding a bike, and the person who was in charge of the facility was also the head of the Olympic Training Center strength conditioning program. So I knew him really well. So I would just go in there and do my own thing by myself and get some extra cardio in on a bike or whatever. And one day I was sitting next to this guy and talking, and he turns out to be, he's like, I'm a manager for the basketball team. Oh, cool. Bad man. He's like, but I'm not a manager of the basketball team. I'm LeBron's manager. I'm like, okay, awesome. And it turns out to be one of LeBron's best friends. And he's like, the whole basketball team is going to come in here in a minute. And we were told that if the basketball team was coming, we had to leave. So they're like, okay, I'll finish up and I'll get out of here. It's like, no, don't leave. Stay here. One big happy family. We're going to stay here. So the basketball team proceeds to come in, Jason Kidd and Carlos Boozer and Dwight Howard and LeBron and Kobe. And they're all coming in one by one. And I'm mesmerized. I'm a huge sports fan. So I'm just in awe. I'm trying to play it cool. And then I'm just thinking in my head, I need to make this the longest workout of my life. I'm not leaving here. I'm doing everything gymnastics I possibly can. I'm going to make this the longest workout of my life. So most of them are just chilling out. And they start to see some of the things that I'm doing, and they become what is this guy doing? I'm doing leg lifts and gymnastics related core work. And so they start to challenge me on things. I'm doing leg lifts next to Dwight Howard, and he's trying to do leg lifts, and they're all making fun of him. And Carlos Bosch were measuring biceps with Bosch and all these. It was hilarious. And that was super fun. And one of a moment that I'll never forget. But with all that happening, with all these guys having fun and being a team, two guys were not present with that group. Kobe and LeBron were doing their own thing. And while this moment was absolutely seemed like a down moment, they were pursuing something at such a separated high level that I couldn't stop watching them. They were doing their own training with their own separate trainers. That was their own thing. That was intense. They were doing some intense stuff while the other 13 guys or whatever it was were just hanging out. And it was such a clear separation in terms of mentality being in the gym that it was very visible as to why those guys were who they were. And you've heard every Kobe story. If you've listened to any podcast or listen to Kobe or know him waking up at 4 a.m. while other guys are coming back from partying and him going to the gym, and it was evident. It was not a show. It was not something that it was performative at all. I, as a casual observer, notice in one setting why he was special and why the two of them were unique. And it was this mentality of, I'm pursuing something that's never been done before, and I have to do it at a level that has never been done before. And so I was in awe of what those guys were doing while already being at the peak, the height of their abilities. It was just so noticeable to me, and I'll never forget like just watching them being like, okay, this is why these guys have separated themselves. And so for me, it's one of those moments that really sticks out as to high level achievers going above and beyond.
That's so cool to me.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I did a whole series on Kobe. I think that was probably the Olympics where LeBron learned that about Kobe, is that, you're actually seeing them put in the work.
Yeah.
I think there's a really powerful thing about team level events for individual athletes. I mean, let's take Steve Kerr, right? Who coached the Olympic team this year. He gets to see how all these players practice. He gets to see all these things. That's like a huge advantage for him.
Sure, he goes back to Golden State and he's like, all right, guys.
But the other players get to do it too. You get a cheat code into, this is LeBron's process. Mm-hmm. I get to see how far away I am from him. Or this is how Steph Curry is doing his shooting drills and how he's training. And to me, I'm a little different. I'd be in there with a notepad the whole time, like, oh my goodness, like how are these people that I'm competing with or that I'm playing with doing it, and what can I take?
Well, we had our national team camps, and when I first started on national team, there's anyone who was around the sport of men's gymnastics around the early 2000s will say that there's this particular national team camp. And what happened, we'd probably have like 4 a year, one a quarter, where we would all go to a particular location, most likely Colorado Springs, and we would train for a week. And it was meant to prepare us for something, create a team environment, learn from each other. But it was exactly that. We had the ability to kind of see the way the other guys trained, who's doing something different or unique or pursuing, a particular skill in a different way, and talk to each other and say like, hey, I'm having, you do this skill really well. I'm having trouble with it. We might not be on the same collegiate team, but our end result is try to make Team USA the best. How can we help each other out? And there's a particular camp in 2003, my first national team camp, that was one of the most incredible training environments. Like, we were split up into two teams, a red team and a blue team. And we competed on everything the whole week, everything. Like types of food we were eating, like everything you could imagine, we turned into a competition. And it was like everyone who finished up with that week will tell you it was probably the most impactful week of training that we've ever had, any of us, that we weren't able to like walk or train for like 2 weeks afterwards because we were just so drained. But it was incredible. And there's a video of it. We were given like cassette tapes of it, and I have it somewhere, and I haven't looked at it in a while, but I want to go back and review that week, because in my mind, again, if you go back and you talk to Blaine Wilson or Steve McCain or Jason Gatson, Brett McClure, these guys that were the legends on that leading up to that 2004 team, they'll tell you that camp was really special. And it's the same thing. Like Team USA, you put those guys together in a room, something special happens, something magical. You do learn about each other, but there's something really, really unique about those training environments.
Well, that gets me super fired up, because honestly, that's what this podcast is all about for me, is like, hey, how do we study these people, consolidate the insights in one place, and be a resource where anyone can come and learn from the greatest. I mean, probably not going to get the exact same environment, obviously, but to me, that is where the secret sauce is made when you're consolidating. I mean, every athlete I've studied. I mean, Kobe is calling up Michael Jordan in the middle of the night, asking him a question. Michael Phelps is also calling up Michael Jordan or Ray Lewis or someone, and they're getting all these insights. Tiger is,
hanging out with Bill Walsh, as you mentioned.
Exactly. Bill Walsh at Stanford. It's crazy to see how much the best want to learn, and also how much actually gets learned when they get together. It's like a natural, like gravitational thing where, hey, I'm here with you and I want to know everything that you know. Right. And it's like, I'm obviously not one of the greatest, but it's one of these things.
It's being a sponge, and I will say again, maybe we'll get to it, but it's one of the things that Powermonkey has really achieved. Like our camps bring together those elite of the elite and all these other little niche sports, and we learn from each other. So it's created an environment where we've, taken some of the top things that we did as athletes and allowed us to recreate it in a new space.
Well, let's talk about Powermonkey now. I think that's like a perfect segue. Cool. Obviously, from a high level vision perspective, I think we're very aligned, right? You want to bring in all these people who are the best, but also give access to people who are just normal people, right? And I'd love to hear about the mission and a little. I also want to get deep into the camps. So the camps seem like one of the coolest things of all time.
Yeah, it really is special. Yeah. So Powermonkey was started basically that Victoria's Secret show in 2010 put me in touch with my partner with Powermonkey, Shane Garrity, and my wife, Sadie, was a big part of our getting this thing off the ground. But we started it with a ring training device. We call it the Ring Thing. It's a pulley device that we put together, and it's a great training tool for people who want to learn ring specific movements, take away 50% of your body weight, and learn how to do things technically sound. We have them, at a lot of the top collegiate gyms and things like that, but a lot of the CrossFit space, functional fitness space have been using as a tool for athletes to train. So I was like a traveling salesman for a while, just kind of like going around a gym selling this product for years. And then we started to coach and train and do courses around, hey, there's people who are in these gyms all around the world who are trying to learn how to do a handstand and trying to get up on, bars and rings and have no understanding of the technical components into it. This is an opportunity. There's a lot of people within the gymnastics and for a long time weightlifting space too, of saying like, these people are bastardizing our movements. Like they're turning what is a beautiful movement into shit. And we should not do anything with them. Like let them do their thing. We're the purists here. We're doing things technically correct. And with Powermonkey, we had a completely different objective and viewpoint on it. We're like, why would you turn away someone that helped grow your sport?
Who wants to learn?
Who wants to learn? Like these people, they might be doing it poorly, but it's because they don't know. Give them the knowledge, help them learn. So that's been our entire pursuit, is saying, can we create an avenue for these people to learn technically sound foundations so that they can continue to do it for longevity? Again, not so much just for competition purposes, but more take body weight gymnastics, whether that's barbell movements, and turn it into a pursuit where they're having fun and doing it safely and technically sound. And so our courses kind of grew, and then we pursued doing a full-fledged we do programs, things like that through our Powermonkey training app, which is a big way that we work with people digitally now. Like we have a full assessment that's done, puts people into levels depending on what their starting points are. And it's a really great tool. But our camp has become our best and probably most acknowledged way of working with people in person. And it's a beautiful facility out in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. It's owned by two Olympic gymnast friends of mine, John Roethlisberger and John McCready. And I've been going there for almost 20 years now, teaching kids in the summers. And it's an amazing spot, 150 acre campus. Now there's 50,000 square foot of gym spaces, four gyms, a beautiful 32 acre lake, 17 cabins. It's an idyllic location out in really the woods. It's awesome. And I've been going there for years, teaching kids in the summers and working with the next generation of gymnasts. And as Powermonkey grew, we're like, can we use this for adults? Like, why not? Like, why not create a situation where adults can be kids again? And bring in some of the great minds of all of these little niche sports that we've been working with and create an incredible informational week where everybody's learning from some of the best minds in this space. And so I was able to, get Sadie, my wife, and Shane, my partner, on board to be able to say, we should maybe pursue this. And then we started to collect some of the other athletes that we thought might be great to have on board. Chad Vaughn on the weightlifting side, Dave Newman from RX Smart Gear, some endurance people, some people like some PTs who are working in the space that we could say, let's add some of the medical side and say, hey, how can we make our training pursuits and our coaching pursuits a little bit more sound in terms of medical research is looking at. And so we collected this group of ragtag experts and said, we're gonna put together an incredible informational week. And that first camp that we put on 12 years ago, we had 30 coaches and 30 participants. We lost a shit ton of money. It was like not a financially viable model. But the story I always like to tell is that we knew we had something special, was that we were getting people on the bus to go home and everyone was crying after a week. And I couldn't believe that people who had just met each other were crying. Like, these are adults. These are people that, had no understanding of who these other people were just a few days ago. And they didn't want to leave. These had become lifelong friends. And so what we intend to do in terms of putting together an incredible informational week turned into an experience purely organically because of the people. And we kind of just put the guidelines around what would turn into one of the great pursuits of my life in terms of life experiences. Powermonkey Camp has become my third child, two daughters in Powermonkey Camp. And I think anyone that comes out has a similar experience. We have campers.
To be clear, they were crying because they didn't want to
They
leave.
didn't want to. Yeah, they were
not
crying
because they were
injured and they were
Yeah.
hurt. They didn't want to leave. They felt like they had met people that they wanted to hang out with for the rest of their lives. And so it told me, oh my God, we've created something that is well beyond what we never initially intended. And so camp continued to grow, and now we cap it at 100 participants. We bring in about 50 to 70 coaches, staff, experts in a variety of different fields. And we've turned it into something that is a real holistic training environment, stretch classes, sleep optimization for athletes, mental training seminars, nutrition seminars. We've done adaptive seminars. We've done, contrast therapy. We do a lot of recovery tools and give people access to elite training methods and coaches and techniques that you normally wouldn't have access to. And so the really special part of it is you can go to an elite training seminar. You can go to a weekend seminar. You can go to a week training where there's 10 experts who are great at what they do and some of the top in their fields. Powermonkey Camp does one level above that in terms of us being all cohesive. And this goes back to what we were talking about from before. Cohesive meaning we've worked together for over a decade. So our methods have all been bettered because of what we learned from each other. And so in the same way that those training center environments or Team USA training together, you pick up tools and pick up methods. We do that with each other. So my handstand training methods have become better by working with lifters who work on overhead positions with barbell in hand. How do I open up someone's T-spine using some barbell methods to help someone in pursuit of a handstand? All of these things have been worked on together. And so there's not individual 10 verticals. They all have a through line. There's tentacles that overlap. And so for us, it's something that we're really proud of, that all of our methods have been changed and bettered because of each of the other experts that we have on board. So to me, it's something that you can't really experience unless you're there. I can talk about it. I'm not trying to be a salesman. It's just something I really enjoy and I love. But it is something that is much bigger and better than what we ever intended to put on.
That is so cool. And I think the last one Allison spoke at.
Allison's been with us for about 5 years.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. So Dr. Allison Brager, who her accolades.
Introed us.
Yeah, exactly. She is our through line. She's a connected piece here. She is absolutely phenomenal. Allison, her accolades and her bio is worth looking into. Army Warrior Fitness Team. So listen to her podcast.
A legend.
She's absolutely incredible, in pursuit of becoming an astronaut with NASA and, on a short list to potentially go to Mars one day, and an NCAA athlete in pole vault and all the things. But her specialty in sleep too, her kind of grandfather in terms of the sleep research was one of my professors at Stanford, Dr. William Dement, who, the professor of sleep research at Stanford, discoverer of REM sleep and sleep and dreams course, really famous Stanford class. Anyway, we found out that we had that mutual person in common, Allison, and she's been an incredible resource for us at camp to be able to teach our campers and our staff and the athletes that we work with the importance of sleep. Obviously, it's become much more of a talking point recently in terms of overall performance, but how to approach it, what's optimal, not just for the everyday person, but for the athlete out there. And so, yeah, Allison is a big part of our team on the lecturer side.
Amazing. Well, we talked about sleep a little bit there. We also talked about working with people who are not necessarily the highest level athletes or highest level performers. They could be high level athletes just from different disciplines.
Sure.
Something that I've seen as a common thread across just humans is the importance of fundamentals. And it seems like that's something you guys are really focused on. Mm-hmm. Something that's a little bit different that I've heard you guys talk about, and maybe this is a gymnastics thing, maybe this is like a more structured sport thing, is progressions of movements. That's something I feel like has been missing in my training quite a bit. It's like, oh, I'm great at the fundamentals, but what's next? Mm-hmm. And I'd love to get your thoughts on the importance of that, especially as you're training people who maybe are not elite level gymnasts. Yeah,
for us, it's the foundation of everything that we do. We have a slogan that technique matters. Like technique and doing things as technically perfect as you can pursue is critically important. Not just the end result, but the steps that you take to get there. And I think sometimes we have a tendency, especially with the world that we're working within, to think about the standard and training towards a standard in terms of how it relates to a competitive situation, as opposed to thinking about the development of the skill, working towards the highest level variation of that movement. And that's the way that we teach. So we're always teaching people to have the eye on the prize in terms of what is this progression or skill that we're working towards in terms of its final level. As from a handstand perspective, just to give an example, if we're thinking about training a handstand, what is your definition of the highest level version of handstand? What can that work towards? People will say, okay, getting off of the wall, I'm doing a freestanding handstand, and not walking, but staying in one place. Okay, what about doing a one-arm handstand and working on some hand balancing at a level that, is just working on one hand instead of two? What about working on a ring freestanding handstand where you have a dynamic action involved? And I tell this to people that we work with endlessly, and sometimes they laugh because they're like, well, I'm never going to achieve that. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant to me as to whether or not that is ever achieved. What's important is to understand that if you have the progressions in place, that can be achievable at some point. So you don't dead end skill development. That's what we want to stay away from as much as possible. You don't want to get to a point where you've dead end that skill because you've thought of only as it pertains to a particular workout or a particular standard. The standards change in terms of how they are used in a competitive setting. The peak of that movement pattern does not change. So we're always teaching people, what is the observable final movement pattern, and what are the progressions, the stepping stones that allow us to work towards it. And so for us, the number of progressions is critical so that someone can actually say there's an achievable next step. A lot of times we also hear people say, can you do a handstand? I can either do a handstand or I can't do a handstand. There's this binary yes or no. That's not the case. You are always somewhere along this continuum of a first tentative attempt of that movement all the way up to mastery of that movement. And understanding where you are along this continuum is critical in understanding what the next step is. So whenever anyone says, I can do a skill or I can't do a skill, it's a very base level way of thinking about skill development. You need to be able to say, what within this movement pattern is preventing me from being able to get to the next progression? What is stopping me? Is it a wrist mobility issue? Is it underarm soft tissue mobility issue? And I can't get into a better overhead position to be able to balance myself correctly. And this comes from us being able to relay those coaching techniques into a much more accessible way. We don't want to overly complicate things. We want to make them accessible, but also give people the understanding that we have enough progressions for you no matter what your starting point is, right? And we have the next one for you. Gymnastics is challenging for a lot of people. I'm talking more from gymnastics because weightlifting probably has some similar talking points, but a lot of times people gravitate towards progressions in weightlifting because it's more obvious. Not just the technical pieces, but I can say, okay, if my front squat technique is good, how do I measure success? I put more weight on and my load increases and I can actually see an achievable, progression in terms of whether it's reps or load or whatever it might be. But on gymnastics, it's more nebulous, right? How am I getting better at this? I have no idea. The way that you can start seeing success on the gymnastics skill development side is by having more progressions. And by saying that this progression is led by this progression, this leads into this one. And so we've tried to break down movements into a variety of different kind of branches. And say, if you are struggling on this particular component of this skill, you have to do this. And so that you have the ability to say, okay, if I'm at this level 1 here with this push progression, I can go to the next, I can go to the next, I can go to the next. It gives the person the ability of seeing achievable results within their movement pattern that can then be built back into the eventual movement. So for us, foundations, technique is absolutely critical for skill development. I'll mention one more thing in terms of how we approach skill development. We think that all skills need to be worked on in a 4-phase process. And the first phase of that skill development process is something that every gymnast goes through. And it's about creation of body shapes. Can I get my body in the shape without any external load, the shape that I need for higher skill development? So being able to create body shapes necessitates 2 things. It necessitates a strong core, everything that encompasses your midline, not just your abs, your hip flexors, your obliques, rotation, and lateral work, as well as your posterior chain. If I have a strong core, it's going to allow me to manipulate my body more effectively for those shape creations, creating things that, gymnasts think of as like a hollow and arch, those two fundamental positions for a lot of things that we do. But then secondarily, it's about mobility. Do I have the ability to not just passively have the flexibility of getting there passively, but to be able to control my end ranges? So if I have a mobile body and I have a strong core, I can create good shapes. So that'll allow me to then apply it to anything that I go on to. So that first phase is actually critical for gymnastic skill development. But for me, it's a fundamental piece for any skill development.
Literally
help
life.
you.
Like
Yeah, exactly.
Around being less pain-free, like all this
Pick
stuff.
up a barbell, pick up a golf club, pick up a baseball bat, whatever it might be. That's why I always say like gymnastics is a great foundational sport for anything else you go on to do. Not to go to the Olympics, but it's a great foundation for any other sport. The phase 2 is the part that nobody wants to do. But if you go to any gymnastics gym, this is where we're spending a majority of our time. It's by slowing things down. All right. It's where we work on our isometrics, our pause work, our tempo work, pause with our push and pull work. And we see this being done a lot in the weightlifting world, but not nearly enough on the gymnastic side with most people's skill development. Slowing things down and working through full ranges of motion will allow you to understand how to control once we get to the phase 3, which is where everyone jumps through dynamic action, using swinging and kipping and momentum to work around what you lack in phases 1 and 2. And this is where I think there's been a missing link in the CrossFit space and functional fitness, where people are not taking the time or acknowledging the necessity of having phase 1 and 2 in place and using swinging and kipping in workouts where they have no business doing it. And that's where we see a lot of fail videos, a lot of people getting injured and falling and hurting themselves on movements that they're not ready for. To do one time, maybe, barely, but to do in long-term workouts that require a very high level of proficiency. And I think that's where a lot of the mistake comes in terms of doing high skill movement patterns in high volume workouts in high intensity. It becomes really difficult to navigate that unless you're really highly proficient. And then the last phase, the culmination of phases 1, 2, and 3, which is creation of sequences, complexes, and routines, where you might see an Olympian in the gymnastics world do something at the Olympic Games, a palm horse routine, a bar routine, a beam routine, putting together skills at a high level that encompass 1, 2, and 3 together into something more complex. So for us, those 4 phases is basically how we build out the learning process.
Well, I love how structured this all is. I think it's not overly structured, it's not overly cumbersome, but the idea that everyone you work with knows where they stand and where they can improve is something that I think every athlete, every coach can take note of. Mm-hmm. If you know exactly what you have to do to get to the next level, you can just go out and do that.
Right.
I think that there's so much ambiguity in a lot of sports, particularly in golf. I mean, I've been to so many coaches where they're like, oh, you just need to work on this movement. And then I'm like, well, what's next? And they're like, well, work on this first. And then it's like, well, doing this movement and getting my body to do the right thing for that in this snapshot of time might mean that for the next movement, I'm actually activating the wrong muscles. I'm creating weird imbalances, and it's not a successful progression. And the idea that we're on this continuum was something that was so profound to me, is that so there's physical and skill based things. So like physically, I popped out one of my ribs. My T-spine mobility is really bad, and it's something I have to work on. But I can't physically get to a specific position that I know I should get to because of my limited T-spine mobility. So these things work together, and I now know exactly what I have to work on to be able to get into that position. And to me, that's something that is so overlooked constantly in the sports that I'm studying. And I really like how you brought that up, but also how at Powermonkey, you guys have systematized it. Yeah. That to me is a huge gap that a lot of people don't realize in sports. And especially as athletes and as coaches, it takes a lot of work to be able to create the infrastructure, to create the system, to create the progression. But without a doubt, it pays off. It pays off. I mean, and what we're trying to achieve is, yes, a system for an athlete. When we say athlete, basically anyone who has a body that wants to learn these things can pursue it and can understand the process, because our goal is for them to potentially not need us in the future, meaning to empower them to understand what needs to be done next. So the educational component is critical. Like, we want to be a resource for, yes, creating the system, but also creating the education for them to be able to say, I understand where the mistake is. So maybe you're viewing it and like, hey, send me a video. I'll tell you what I'm noticing. But really, I always tell people that there are really levels of competency in terms of athletic achievement.
in terms of what an athlete is understanding in terms of what their body's doing. A high level athlete is able to make a change when they're doing something static. So say I'm in a handstand, right? Taking a gymnastic reference. A high level athlete is able to say, okay, what are my feet doing? What does my shoulder angle look like? I need to make this correction to improve my line, to create more efficiency. An athlete that's not as proficient is not able to make those changes in something static. So it takes a lot of time to empower the athlete with the right education and the right movement patterns to make static changes. The elite of the elite are able to make those same changes when something dynamic happens. So during the downswing of hitting a golf ball, or during a tap when you're on high bar, when you're about to do a release move, maybe your timing is a little bit off. And I realized that I released the bar a little bit early. If I release the bar a little bit early as I'm flying into the air, where does that put me? It puts me on top of the bar. So I'm very likely going to land on the bar with my stomach unless I make a change in a split second to then kick out early, search for the bar earlier, know where to look to be able to then save myself from hitting on the bar. These things happen so quickly that only the elite of the elite who are educated in terms of being able to understand what their body mechanics are doing are able to make those changes. So what we try to stay away from is just saying, don't think, just do. We want you to understand the reason behind the progressions, ask the questions, so that at some point down the road, your body will naturally take over. You've done this so many times that your body will naturally take over, and that's when the thinking can be put to the side. So the process is so important for us to be able to build out a method so that the athlete is smart enough and can ask the right questions and internally become empowered enough to answer them themselves.
I think that's a beautiful thing. That is like maybe the holy grail of all training is that how do you make the teacher obsolete in the long run? Yeah. And I would argue that the teachers are almost never obsolete because I think one of the roles of a coach is to continually educate, whereas the athlete, they can't possibly continually educate at the same rate as a coach because they have to compete and do these other things. But that's probably exactly where the sweet spot of the Venn diagram is that, you have to learn and understand the fundamentals and the core of these movements. And then when we want to get fancy, the coach can come in and sort of help and icing.
Yeah, I don't think we're writing ourselves out of the equation here. I think what we said, it's about empowering the athlete and giving them more tools. And as I said, we're not thinking about this from the perspective of the elite, the Olympic champions here. The everyday athlete that wants to get better can still pursue these things and benefit from these tools. And so that's why I've been excited about this, is that we're pursuing an enormously big group of people that are now interested in these sports at a different level. You see it because golf is such a popular sport outside of the competitive side, outside of the elite side. But gymnastics has now just started. It's very much in its infancy in terms of people finding interest in bodyweight and gymnastics movements for fitness as opposed for a competition.
Honestly, I would recommend all golfers explore gymnastics, explore some of these fundamental movements better, because a lot of people don't think about how much like pelvic tilt there is, how important the core is in the golf swing. And I know personally, like my golf swing is it looked fine on camera, but I wasn't activating the right muscles most of the time. And that's led to me have some back issues and all these types of things. It's like, I didn't have the core strength fundamentals that were really relevant, especially after my rib injury, where, not to get too technical, but as I'm sure you know, our T-spine is actually supposed to rotate more than our hips. And I was using all of my rotation in my hips. Okay. And so basically I'm ruining my lower back because I didn't have the proper fundamentals of strength and flexibility across those ranges. And so again, probably one of the best places to learn that is through the fundamentals.
I agree. I always fight with my weightlifting coaches. Like, what's a better place, start with weightlifting, get strong, or start with gymnastics and get body competent? I'm always going to pursue and preach that gymnastics is such a great foundation. In fact, USA Gymnastics, I don't know if they still have it, but they used to have a slogan of begin here, go anywhere. You don't have to go to the Olympics. It's about starting with this fundamental and then use this body awareness and spatial awareness to any other physical pursuit you're going to go on to do.
Well, I think that's a perfect segue into the last topic I really wanted to touch on with you, which is what is the current state of gymnastics in the USA? Obviously there was some highlights at the Olympics this past year, but it seems to me like, and from hearing you talk quite a bit, it's not necessarily headed in the best direction. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that, but also if there's anything we can do about that.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing it up because it is one of my pursuits, of helping to grow the sport, and not just gymnastics, men's gymnastics specifically, because women's gymnastics is in a much better place than men's gymnastics. It's obviously much more highlighted, and during the Olympic Games, the women's program here is much more robust. There's, I don't know how many times more girl gymnasts doing gymnastics growing up as opposed to boy gymnasts out there. We did have some uptick in terms of interest when the Olympics roll around, especially this year because there were so many highlights. But the long-term viability of the sport of men's gymnastics in the States is precarious. It's in a bad spot because of what's been happening at the NCAA level, and the NCAA, as I mentioned earlier, being our pipeline to creating the next great gymnasts in our country. It's our weeding out process. It's how we give young kids the ability to pursue it at a higher levels through scholarships. And a lot of those things are being taken away. I don't know how deeply you want to get into this from the NCAA level, but a lot of the decisions being made at the NCAA level are affecting not just gymnastics, but a lot of non-revenue generating Olympic sports, swimming, wrestling, baseball, a lot of these others that rely on the infrastructure that the NCAA provides to be able to create a haven and an avenue for these athletes to compete. And that's being pulled away. NIL, transfer portal, conference realignment have all created situations where gymnastics and other sports are suffering now and going to continue to suffer in the future, like to the point where it's on the brink of failure. There's only maybe 12 or 13 sports left that have men's gymnastics at the NCAA level. Every year that I was at school, another program dropped. And it's continued to be that way. This year, Ohio State dropped their scholarships. When Ohio State is one of the Big Ten has always done a good job of trying to retain a lot of the programs. But Minnesota dropped a year and a half ago. Ohio State is dropping their scholarships because they need that money to help pay for football players. And their athletic department is in need of being able to retain as much fund as possible because NIL is requiring payment of athletes now. And athletes who are deserving of getting paid should get paid. Absolutely. But the system is broken. Like, it's fundamentally broken right now. And I think we're in a little bit of a wild west in terms of figuring out a solution. And during this interim period of figuring it out, athletes who are extremely high profile, the Shedeur Sanders of the world, the Mannings of the world, the Livy Dunns of the world, are making extraordinary amount of dollars, which they should, and take advantage of it. If you're an athlete that has the ability to do it, do it. But it is having an incredible impact in terms of how the structure and the landscape of these other sports are being impacted. So I don't think it's sustainable. There's no way that athletic programs are going to be able to compete at that level of just constantly finding more and more money to be able to pay the athletes and keep those other programs running. We saw it at Stanford a couple of years ago during pandemic. They dropped 11 sports, and there was a huge uproar within the Stanford alumni network. And AAD was like, we just don't have the funds. We can't make. And you're like, Stanford has more money than most schools out there. How do you not have the ability to fund those 11 programs? And there's more nuance to that. The athletic department, the athletic dollars are very separated from each other. You don't take academic dollars and apply them to
Title IX and those types of things as well, which is different now.
The Title IX is about scholarship equity. So it's about making sure that there's equal number of scholarship opportunities on the female side as there is on the male side. Now, the challenging part to that is football does not have an equivalent on the female side. So when you have 85 scholarships or whatever it is on the men's side, you have to even that out on the female side. So what is an athletic department going to do? Are they going to add 85 scholarships on the female side? No, they're going to pull away from the men's side to be able to find that. It's a natural balance of the budget, especially when you're talking about a sport that doesn't bring in a lot of dollars, and it's slowly chipped away from our ability to create an avenue for men's gymnastics and some of these other sports to be able to be viable into the future. And we've been lucky in that we've continued to have success at the Olympic level, but it will stop. There will be a point where the USOPC has to step in and say, there are no kids doing gymnastics anymore, men's gymnastics. There's just no avenues for a parent to want to put their kid into gymnastics past age 12, because why would I do that? There's no place for them to go and compete.
Yeah, there's no scholarships.
There's no scholarship, and it's going to happen in other sports as well. So there will be a big drop off because our system has been built around the NCAA to be a pivot point for these athletes to continue their career in the sport. And the USOPC has just taken advantage of it, right? They've said NCAA is kind of our playground to test out athletes. The US system is incredibly different than every other system in the world. You know, most people, if you follow the Olympics at all, maybe you're aware of this, but it is worth noting that the US is essentially the only high level program in the world that doesn't get funded by the government, right? So you go to the Chinese National Training Center, it's all funded by the Chinese government, Russia, all the European countries, they're all funded by their governments. The USOPC is funded by donation, by television rights. So it's funded much differently and much more separated, and our dollars are much more scarce and requires funding departments, and it requires fundraising efforts at a level that no other governing body has to do, no other country has to worry about. So if you take away our main pipeline that we've had in place for decades and the growth potential of those sports, it's going to drop off a cliff. Like there needs to be some protections in place for us to make sure that the pipelines, if we care at all about having medal supremacy at the Olympic Games, if that's something that still matters to the USA.
Well, I think it from a personal perspective, I think it absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I obviously work with a couple USA sports.
Yep.
And I think that's our way that we signal that we're doing well to the world. I'm like heavily patriotic in this sense. And it's
as
like,
well, yeah.
It's unbelievably so. I mean, I'm probably not as patriotic as you, to be honest, but I'm like, it really saddens me that this area where we could excel, where we could show to the world how great we are at creating athletes, creating, you know, people that are pushing the boundaries, could potentially be cut off because of an inefficient system or politics or whatever it might be. That is so frustrating to me.
It is for me as well. And I think, again, maybe I'm just an old man in this, but my collegiate experience was very special to me. I loved being in a collegiate atmosphere where you're training for your team and you're putting that block S on your chest and you're going to compete for the other students and your teammates, and you become connected to that school as you are probably with UVA. Like that's part of your bio. Like I went to that school, my closest friends this new system is tearing that apart. It's tearing it apart. Like the next generation of collegiate athletes are not going to have that at all. And part of that is the transfer portal, which I think is probably one of the bigger issues that I have, even more than, the dollars that are challenging to overcome in terms of them being distributed in new ways. But if you tell an athlete that, you sign with a particular school and then a day later, if you get a huge contract from, another school across the country, you just leave the next year and you can do this. Like if after you transfer once, you need to sit out a year, but you can have an athlete go to 3 schools in 4 years. There's no more school loyalty. There's no more connection to any experience. There's no more team bonding at all. You're not going to be with a program or an athlete or a teammate for 4 years anymore, ever. These athletes are just going to jump from school to school to school because they're going to jump to where the dollars are. And we've made it advantageous for them to do it. So the complete landscape right now is, like I said, the Wild West, and it's going to make for things to be incredibly challenging in terms of us getting the most out of what then will be our Olympic programs.
Yeah, I mean, to piggyback on that, I'd heard Tom Brady talk pretty recently about the incentives for the kids. And, his experience is it took him 3 years to play at Michigan.
Sure.
He had to work and claw his way up the chain of command there. And the idea that kids now are not going to be able to really ever experience that adversity because, I can just go somewhere else and get paid. Absolutely I think they should get paid. I think that they should get what they're worth, but it's not about just going somewhere different if you're not liking the outcome. It's a lot about you chose a school, not necessarily saying you should stick it out if you're getting screwed over, but where's the fight? Where is the competitive streak? Where is the idea that, oh, I'm going to beat these other people out and do what I need to do, or maybe sit and learn what I need to sit and learn.
Yeah.
And I think that's going to have a large repercussion just across all of sports as well, is like the idea that like built-in adversity into sports, which is one of the best things about it, is getting pulled away a little bit.
Yeah.
Because we've made it easy for athletes to jump back and forth is a little sad to me. I mean, in the highest level, they have contracts, right?
Absolutely.
Which makes it so that it's a little harder to do. That still happens. But
I think that will be the next step. Like, we've been talking more about the problems and not offering too many solutions. And I think that's the hard part. Like, well, how do we fix it? How do we make it so that, you know, there is a route towards longevity with some of these smaller niche sports that do have an impact at the Olympic level. And I don't think there's anything perfect there, but one, creating contracts in the same way that you would at the professional level for these athletes to say, you know, if you sign here, you have to stay for 4 years, or you have to, you know, saw that the new quarterback that signed with Michigan, he signed a 10-year deal, $2.5 million a year, 4 years. Like that will be a portion of a solution to keep athletes in a particular location. But I also think that, and this has been something that has come up often, but separating football from the rest of the NCAA landscape and making that its own entity and having its own thing. And I know that a lot of athletic departments fund their other programs through their football program. But I think if we want to say that football is what it is in terms of TV rights and the dollars that it brings in from sponsor perspective, and not have to worry about the scholarship implication, figuring out a way to have football as its own entity probably gives the NCAA an opportunity to figure out, you know, Title IX and dollars in a little bit more of an equitable way, as opposed to just thinking that football needs to then dominate the rest of the sports.
That makes sense. You've talked in the past also about endowments and things along those lines. Is that still a viable route?
It is. It's just incredibly challenging. You know, I've been trying with a few of my other former teammates and alum at the Stanford level with trying to endow Stanford men's gymnastics program. We were fortunate that we were not one of the teams that was dropped, which is very, very fortunate, surprising. But, you know, the team has been doing very well. The team has not lost the national championships in the last 6 years. They're an absolute powerhouse right now, and they have a majority of the Olympic team, and they'll probably continue to recruit really well. But that helps when your team is winning in terms of keeping it interesting to the athletic department. But endowing the program is the best route to making sure that your individual team sticks around no matter what. You're self-funded, but the amount of dollars that's required to endow a program is significant. At Stanford, it's probably around $15 million that is needed to fund and endow the program. We say endow the program, I mean the head coach position, the assistant coach positions, the operating costs that go into maintaining the facility and all of those things, the budget for the travel, the scholarships, all of those things. It's a significant dollar amount. So
sorry to clarify, the $15 million is what would be needed, like essentially in an endowment, and the residuals of that would cover everything so what's each year.
Exactly. So what that dollar amount brings in through interest and things like that each year would fund the operating costs and the budget for the program each year. So the endowment is meant to be able to say what this amount of dollars brings in each year will fund a yearly amount, and it doesn't take away anything from the athletic department.
Well, if any rich Stanford graduates are listening to this, Tiger.
Yeah, I mean, there are probably plenty of them out there that have an amount that would be able to assist, but that's the reality of most of those sports. Endowment is a path towards, you know, security, but it just comes with a price point that's not very viable for a lot of programs and a lot of teams.
So maybe the last thing I want to touch on is there like a government approach to this that they could be involved for helping with these programs? Is that something that, especially with the political climate and cost cutting mentality, maybe of the next group coming in?
I don't know. I'll say this, like one Olympic success and it being a patriotic thing maybe bodes well in terms of us saying, hey, this matters in terms of us being patriotic towards a very important part of who we are as a country. But it does cost dollars. And I know that it's such a big concern. And for a very long time, there's been a again, from my understanding and more from observing than having an actual role, but within the USOPC, there's been an active pursuit against taking government dollars because of what comes along with that. Saying, okay, now we're giving you the dollars. Now you have to do X, Y, Z. You need to run it a particular way. You need to have these people in positions. You're going to have this type of regulation. So the autonomy that comes along with staying separated from any government dollars has been an important piece for the USOPC to run things the way that they see fit. So you don't want to open up that can of worms, because you do it once, then you're never going back to the other route. But on the NCAA level, I think it's gonna require a lot of important conversations about the longevity of, because this is probably going to sneak up on us more than we're going to be prepared for. And there's going to be a point of no return. Like once those sports go away and those facilities are changed over and those coaches are gone, it's going to be incredibly difficult to then bring them back later down the road. So I think there's some real conversations that probably need to have had now if we want to see some long-term, not only retention, but growth of these Olympic sports within the NCAA landscape.
Yeah. Unfortunate, but hopefully we have those conversations.
I hope so.
I think one of the hard things too is that each thing is on an individual school basis, and it's not like a blanket policy that's going to be evaluated. It's individual schools dropping off based on individual economics.
Absolutely.
And that makes it really hard to evaluate. Dave, was there anything that I should have asked that I did not ask?
No, man, I appreciate the conversation. It's pretty wide ranging and in terms of career and interest levels and what we're doing now with Powermonkey and everything. But if people have any interest in following along and wanting to know a little bit more about how to contact us, if they're interested in coming to an event or anything, they can find me at just powermonkeyfitness.com, powermonkeykcamp.com, or on our IG stuff is mostly where we're posting things on, at Powermonkey Fitness or at Dave Durante.
Amazing. I will link all of those in the show notes as well. Dave, thank you so much. This was awesome.
Thanks,
I really
man.
appreciate it. Thank you so much for tuning into the Exponential Athlete Podcast featuring Dave Durante. If you enjoyed the show, I'd love it if you'd share it with a friend, if you'd leave us a review, or if you'd give me any feedback on the social media platforms that are out there. I've linked in the description or in the show notes to my Instagram, to my LinkedIn, to Twitter, as well as I believe some of the other places out there where you can watch the show. More recently, I've also just launched a Patreon. If you want to financially support the show, that is the single best way to do it. I spend a lot of time, probably upwards of 150 hours, cultivating and curating the notes for these shows. And I also spend a reasonable amount of money traveling to the guests. That's all because I think that produces the highest quality product possible. And that's something that I've committed to for as long as I do this show. I'm totally okay paying out of pocket in the short term. I'm totally okay for spending money to create this because it's something that I have a passion for. It's something that I have a vision for, but any financial help also helps it so that I can continue to do this and create this free resource of information for as long as possible. So absolutely not something you must do, but something that would greatly help the Exponential Athlete Podcast continue to grow. Thank you again for tuning in, and I'm looking forward to pursuing greatness together with you in the future.